Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fractional Podcast. I'm your host, Lance Robbins. I'm here with my co-host, Joshua Wold. It's been a little while, Joshua. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you. We're almost in springtime here in North Idaho, and I'm ready for it.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it's here yet, but the calendar says that the first day of spring is just a couple days away. So we'll see what we get. We also have someone else with us today. Excited to introduce our audience to Rachel Gogel, who is a Parisian-based fractional creative executive. Welcome to the show, Rachel. Great to have you here.
Thanks so much. I will try and share some of that springtime energy because in Paris right now it's already feeling like spring. So thanks so much for having me. Excited to chat about all things fractional.
Yeah. So the term like fractional creative executive could probably mean a number of different things to different people. Can you kind of unpack like what does that look like for most of your customers that you've had? Like what's a day in the life for Rachel look like as a fractional creative executive?
Sure. So at least for me in the day to day, I actually use the term independent creative executive, but I often operate in a fractional capacity for a lot of different brands. A bit of background about me: grew up, or my career evolved alongside the rise of modern digital design. I had some big roles at Facebook and the New York Times and GQ. And then I went out on my own, I guess almost 6 years ago, but at the end of 2020. And since then have collaborated with global organizations in a fractional capacity. So companies like Airbnb, Dropbox, Intuit, HoneyBook, and then also making time for like making sure that I work with also a lot of women-led ventures, which is a personal passion of mine. Companies like Chicken and Egg Films, a new Pulse Fund. Some of those have been in a fractional capacity, but sometimes I'm literally just a designer or a thought partner on the project. So for me, operating as a fractional design leader means joining teams at critical inflection points and then guiding transformation across brand, culture, and technology. And again, that's just how I define it. I'm also a devoted generalist. So I'm a graphic designer by trade, but discovered creative direction early on in my career. And now, almost 20 years later, my work definitely ranges from reimagining editorial platforms and in product visual systems to crafting brand IDs, pitch decks, book covers, you name it. And then I will maybe touch on this a little bit, but the fractional work is actually only a fraction of my time. I have built my career over the last several years in order to kind of make time for other things. So teaching is a huge passion of mine. I sometimes do speaking gigs. I mentor a lot, and I've been exploring writing over the last several years. And as you just alluded to, I moved back to my childhood city of Paris after these 2 decades of living and working in New York and San Francisco. So that's how I define it. But I know we'll dive into like all of these different terms very shortly. So many different people may have different definitions of fractional, but that's how I talk about it. And I'm happy to expand on anything shortly.
I'm curious about something. You
Yeah.
mentioned being a generalist. What does that mean to you, and why do you seem to be happy with that label? So, coming from a design perspective, myself being very much a generalist in many fields, some similar parts of my journey in the creative profession. Yeah, what does it mean to be a generalist?
I guess for me, it means that I'm a devoted, passionate person around many fields. So I tend to say that I'm pretty agnostic to the medium. So I did start my career in print, but very quickly was immersed in mobile and digital storytelling formats. And then that piqued my curiosity about technology. And then it kind of evolved from there. And then I ended up working in tech. I've also explored in house and agency roles at various levels. And so I guess for me, I always enjoyed trying different things and the kind of experimental approach. Now, not to say that, I mean, you could be a specialist and very much also enjoy experimentation, but it means that I like dipping my toes in a lot of different areas. And sometimes that makes it hard for companies to know what to hire you for because maybe you're interested in a lot of different things. And, but it means that I'm not necessarily going deep on any which thing. And
Mhm.
it almost allows me to, I don't know, I guess try different things. And that's maybe what drew me to this world of, well, A, working for myself, and B, the kind of fractional leadership model, which inherently comes with, essentially hiring someone for a certain amount of time, but really, kind of hopefully letting them do their thing. And it's not just kind of one area of expertise, but ends up touching on so many aspects of what being a creative leader means in modern day corporate environments. So at least that's what it means for me. And I sometimes hear, things like, I don't know, with the emerging AI technology that it's better to be a generalist because then at least you have more options. That being said, I'm a big believer that the world needs both specialists and generalists, and so we can both coexist, and there's been many projects I've been part of that require both types of creatives. So yeah, I guess that would be my answer for now, but depending on the day, maybe I'll have different answers.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
What does it mean for you?
So for myself, I've gone from print to digital to product to web design to development, all of those. And what starts to happen is you get old enough, you've kind of done a lot, right? Where it's been about 20 years that I've been doing a bunch of different things. And when I'm chatting with someone about a potential fractional role, or even in a W 2, I'm talking to someone about something that I could offer within the company. It's been an interesting journey to say, hey, I actually could also do this other thing, which is separate from the thing you thought you had hired me for. And let's have that conversation. And I'm always wrestling a little bit with how to position that because for me, this generalist slash specialist mindset generally follows my curiosity. That's a problem I haven't fully solved yet. And so I want to go solve it. I kind of don't care that it's not specifically in my field of interest. I want to go help solve it and help somebody. And I will pour all my energy into that for about 4 months and then I'll get tired of it and I'll go do something else. And that's been an interesting journey for me. And so that's why I was kind of curious about your own journey because I love being in the larger design field. That's where I've been most of this time. But I'm happy to make a presentation for someone, teach a class, or design an app. Like there's a huge spectrum of things there that interest me.
I love that. Yes, I can relate to that so much. And I know there are plenty of us out there who can relate and identify with the term. I just know that it sometimes makes it harder, especially as a solopreneur, to kind of pitch yourself when you touch on so many things because then companies, I've literally been in conversations where someone says, well, what specifically can I hire you for? And it's like, well, all of these things. But yeah, it almost forces you to figure out where you want to focus when and forces you to develop skills around positioning or tailoring what you want to put out there for very specific clients so that you can hopefully still work on all of these things and make sure that you feel fulfilled in kind of all of the areas that we talked about.
One of the moments I remember years ago is I was working at a startup, and one of the engineers I worked alongside of, I think he was about in his mid 50s, and he was just happily being an individual contributor at the company as a really great engineer. But we'd just chat, and I'd have dinner with him and talk to him and realize he has had a lifetime of being really good at about 20 things. I'll mention something and he just says very humbly, oh yeah, I used to do that in this context. And I realized, wow, I kind of want to be like you. I kind of want to be this person who's just devoted a life to being creative, helping people and living it to the fullest alongside people he cares about. And so that kind of stood out to me as if I reach, let's say, the end ish of my career, having just done a lot and helped a lot of people, that's okay, even if there's not all the accolades and titles to go with it. So he kind of inspired me in that manner.
Love that story. Thanks for sharing.
How often are either of you, this is definitely going off our agenda, but how often are either of you really interested in something like that a customer or an employer is looking for, but you've never done before? And you're like, I want to try that. And have you found success positioning yourself to where you can sit in front of a prospect and say, here's what I've done. I know you're looking for this. I know I can do this and give me a chance, right? Like that's not what we're trying to say is give me a chance. But oftentimes like that's kind of how my internal dialogue is like, I know I can do this work and I'm really interested in trying it. But have you had any success moving from the, I haven't done this before and I want to do it and a customer should hire me for this because I'm the right person.
I mean, the first thing that came to mind was literally my entire career has been that.
Right.
I mean,
No, mine
I
too. And I still struggle with
yeah.
it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that feeling, or maybe for certain people, maybe this is not for everyone, but the kind of constant desire to be in those types of positions that really challenge you, that push you, that kind of force you to grow and you learn on the job. And I know that that happens very often, but there are people who kind of put themselves out there and believe what you just said, and then it can happen. And then yes, all it takes is one person or maybe a group of people to believe in your potential, and there are those people that maybe hire you and then they end up maybe becoming mentors or people who hire you again, or then the domino effect can go from there. There are other people who choose not to put themselves in those positions and maybe are more heads down and stay, find more comfortable roles where it follows very specific tasks, and that's fine too. So no judgment. But yeah, there's like a definitely, and maybe it comes with just being in a creative industry, the growth mindset, wanting to kind of push yourself and try different things. And honestly, because of technology and things happening so quickly now, just kind of putting yourself in areas of discomfort, hoping to learn or stay curious and observe. So I don't know, when you ask that question, at least for me, I'm happy to hear about like Joshua's response. But I was my first full-time job, which was at GQ in 2011, was freelancing, and I was an intern before that, and definitely got a bigger title than I thought I had the experience for, but someone believed that I could do it. And then it also was a people management role. I was in my early 20s. I definitely didn't feel like I'm ready for the job, but I just went for it and did my best, and it was really hard at times for sure, and I was younger than all of my direct reports, but yeah, that's what really kickstarted my career, and I mean, zero regrets, but some people maybe don't thrive in those types of positions and some do. Joshua, what about you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I realized way too late in my career that the way a lot of people get ahead is they just lie about what they've done. Like, oh, well, that's the secret. You just lie about it and you'll get the job. I never caught on to that, and I'm thankful for that. And what I've found works really well for me is to build up trust with somebody, not because I was trying to win them over, but because we genuinely enjoyed working together. And at some point, there comes an ask where I'm like, hey, I want to try to do this thing. I know you know me for this other thing, but would you trust me to try to do this new thing? And I remember distinctly, most of my career has been that. There's been a couple of jumps where a stranger gave me a chance. There's one time where this agency that Lance and I worked at, I was able to work on a mobile app for a tiny bit. And I'd been wanting to do this for years, to actually work on a proper iOS mobile app. Threw myself into the project, helped to make some improvements to it. And then I landed a job and left the agency working on a mobile app for a startup with that as my portfolio. And I was able to tell them, hey, I've done a lot of other types of design. I've done a little bit of mobile app design. Would you give me a chance? They took a chance on me. And that's 5 years later, I've moved into that as a career field. And I've noticed that a lot of times people will give someone a chance if they just instinctively trust them and they don't see them as trying to politically maneuver. And that to me is just a better way to live. So that's how I've operated. Most of my career, I've felt like I am moving way too slow relative to what I think I'm capable of. And then occasionally someone is very kind, lends me a hand, and gives me an opportunity.
I'm a big fan of manifestation. I mean, what you touched on is also just how much power there is in either self-initiated projects or just kind of proving a skill through, again, whether it's paid work or not, it still shows initiative and wanting to give it a try. And then all it takes is someone believing that you can keep doing that. And there are so many people who hesitate to take that leap, and I'll give you a very concrete example. There was someone I was chatting with recently who was considering a fractional path, and their website doesn't mention that at all. And they were wondering if they should wait until they find something and then update their website. And I was basically like, well, you can just decide right now that you are going to start using that term in order to maybe try and find work. And, again, it's like those kind of waiting for permission versus just giving it a go. And, you're right. I don't believe in lying or inflating your skill sets in a ill-willed kind of way.
Mhm.
But there are ways to yeah, I guess like plant seeds and build relationships and kind of build trust, and then hopefully people see things or see your potential to be able to do certain kinds of work, and then you go from there. But yeah, I love
I
what
was
you said.
was talking to a colleague recently who I've been helping friends and colleagues get trained up on how to use AI to prototype apps these are non-designers, non-technical people, wanting to get their ideas out into the world. So I'm showing them how to use Claude to prototype. And this one colleague I was speaking to, they'd been doing this for 2 weeks and they were calling themselves a developer. And I had to think about that. And I realized I've been doing this for 10 years. What I mean by that is creating apps, developing, coding, somewhat designing. And I've never given myself that label, not really. And I'm like, wait, this person feels confident enough to do it in 2 weeks. They recognize that it's the barely beginning of that label. What have I been missing in life? Because there's some things I just won't assign because I look at actual developers, I'm saying in quotes right now, who I work alongside, and I'm just in admiration of their capability. Mine is so much less, but it's definitely more than someone who's 2 weeks into it. So it was an insight I got, and I'm glad I'm still able to learn this far into my career.
Yeah, titles. I mean, maybe this is a good transition to talk about titles because I don't know. I feel like the fractional term is still very much misunderstood. I don't know if you're faced with that at all, but at least in my research so far and just entering the European market. But yeah, do you think that's a natural transition to start talking about that?
Yeah, I think so. I'd love to kind of dive into that. How is it perceived where you are in Europe versus your experience on this side of the ocean? And what kind of market education work needs to be done, you think?
So I'll just say, a lot of this is just me and my own research, and maybe plenty of people out in the world may disagree or have different definitions. But I feel like the creative industry definitely has, a word for this leadership model. This is not a new concept per se. It's just, I feel like they keep applying it wrong, in my opinion. So that's why I said I feel like the word fractional seems misunderstood. And you had asked me thinking about the differences between the word freelance and fractional, and that has come up several times, even in the conversations I've been having since coming back to Europe. So I thought it would be worth maybe even just very quickly defining, again, from my own
Please.
perspective, the two. So for freelance, which again, there's perhaps a Venn diagram with where freelance and fractional can overlap, but most freelance positions tend to be like very project based, often output oriented, somewhat transactional. There's most often some kind of outward facing deliverable. At least for me, it's a term that I used earlier on in my career, so maybe more junior to mid level, or it's used often as a side hustle, like maybe you have a full time job and then you freelance on the side. And it's interesting because I tend to not hear it as much at the executive level. It's very executional, and you're not inherently embedded in a client's company. And again, this is just my own definition of it. Maybe not everyone relates, but for fractional, in my experience, so I've been doing this for 5+ years with all kinds of companies. And for me, anyway, the way that I position these interim leadership roles is I'm inherently more embedded. It's very much relational. I'm kind of embedded and figuring out those relationships between stakeholders. I'm usually a senior leader operating inside an organization. It implies a strategic brain, having some kind of cultural impact on the business, and the ability to navigate ambiguity feels like a requirement to me. Uh, when I left my full-time job, I was a creative director at a small design studio in the Bay Area in 2020. That was my last full-time job. I guess I feared that I would never be able to find all the joys that came with that job and operating in the day-to-day when I went out on my own. I thought that the only way to do that would be to go back full time somewhere. And so what I discovered with my first client, which was an agency called Giant Spoon, hired me to help relaunch Departures magazine, which was a publication that American Express used to put out, although it's no longer around. But they needed a fractional ECD to help them get it off the ground. And I was able to negotiate a a setup with them, which was part time. So it was like 3.5, 4 days a week, and had, certain ways to kind of operate within the company. I had an email address. I was in their Slack channel. I felt like part of the team, but I wasn't being bogged down by some of the things that tend to come with full-time roles. And that's, we can talk about the key differences, but, again, so those to me are some of the key differences between freelance and fractional. I personally don't use the term freelance in the way that I work. Now, that doesn't mean that some clients have, not brought up the word freelance, or sometimes I see job descriptions that use the word freelance, but it maybe speaks to some of the things that I do. So it's still sometimes, which I think is part of the confusion. But, I recently came across an article that essentially was declaring that the creative agency model is dying. And a lot of founders of these studios in my industry are starting to either shut them down or like shrink them. And they're curious about either a fractional leadership path,
Mm.
or there's kind of these emerging, not that this concept is new, but either collectives, like small groups of people who have complementary skill sets, or even duo models. And I've explored this with friends of mine in the past, which is really great. But what I'm talking about is fractional, as in you're solo, you go inward at a company. And I personally really like the flexibility of being a solopreneur so that I can bounce around and offer my services to more clients. Maybe that's because I'm attracted to, uh, all kinds of work as a generalist. I also like having that flexibility. So I'm quite agile. I'm able to easily onboard and adapt to new environments and then figure out what's needed. So what was interesting about the article I just mentioned was it posed this question around, like, how do seasoned creative practitioners do their best work in a post agency, post full time world? And that's happening more and more post COVID. But also due to layoffs and budget changes and things
Hmm.
like that, more people are exploring this path. And so I guess I hope that more people get to discover it or try it. I know it's not for everyone, but you get to operate at a certain level without being full time. And that was a huge unlock for me to redefine success on my own terms and then build a profitable career that sustains my lifestyle.
So
But yeah,
actually, I'd like to have you dig in a little further into the
sure.
pros and cons of being full time versus fractional in the way you've just defined, because you're suggesting that there are some benefits to being fractional and essentially doing some very similar work to if you were full time into that role. So maybe for someone who's looking to hire in a different way or looking to change their career in a different way, what are some of those pros and cons you've seen of being fractional as opposed to full time and doing the same
Yeah.
work essentially?
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe it's worth talking about it from even a company's perspective, and then I can talk about it from someone in my role's perspective. But for companies, you can also kind of define the fractional term in a literal sense, right? Like in the name fractional, you assume that you probably can get something for a fraction of time and ideally a fraction of the cost, but still get the value that you're hoping to get. And that's where embedded executive leadership that like really speaks to me. But usually what that means for companies is you're saving money because you're not paying like payroll taxes. Fractional talent, usually they don't receive benefits like healthcare, 401k, other costly perks. You don't pay for vacation days, sick days, off time. And usually, although sometimes I've seen this in some engagement models, you don't have bonuses. Maybe there's a little bit of equity or you get paid in equity, but usually there's no equity that's expected. And so you're taking all of these additional costs and taking that off the kind of final fee. And so you're getting, a creative director's brain without kind of all of those additional costs that usually come with hiring a full-time employee in this context, let's just say in the US. But often what I just named can really be anywhere. And so for the company, they save a lot of time and then hopefully you get a lot of value. For the individual on the flip side is you have, a lot of more flexibility. You can work with different clients, you can try different things. Let's say that working in that company just doesn't click, you can leave much more easily. I've even fired clients before. That doesn't happen often, but it can happen. Just means that you're not, let's say if you join a company and there's a toxic relationship that ends up appearing, you don't have to be faced with that long term if you don't want to be. And again, I think there's so many. Ideally, it should be a mutually beneficial relationship. Like it should feel like a win-win between the company and the individual, where you're getting your money's worth, but you're also like for that individual that they're excited to be in that role and deeply invested in delivering whatever it is that you need in that moment in time. Um,
And one of the things that I've seen as well, and I'm curious if this matches your own experience, is someone in a fractional role like this can either make more money or spend less time working, right? Because it opens up the opportunity to do other things in life that might matter to them. maybe things personally, things that are professional. And you were kind of touching on that before. So first, I'd be curious if your view on that, and then also like what
Yeah.
fractional has enabled you to do in other areas of your life.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because often I think there's this assumption that having a full-time job means you will make more money than if you were out on your own. I guess, I mean, I'm sure I'm an example, but there are plenty of people out there who can prove that that's not necessarily true. I mean, I feel like the benefit of full-time is you have stability, a paycheck that you can depend on. If the natural ebbs and flows of running your own business and being independent is not for you, that's fine. That's what full-time jobs are there for. But if it's something that you're willing to try, there are like I've definitely like basically my goal when I went out on my own was can I exceed or at least match, but then exceed my base salary from my previous company? And the answer is yes. And I know that means so you touched on this a moment ago, as some of these fractional roles, if you play your cards right, because they're hiring you for value and it should be something that you're being really conscious of intentional time bound constraints that yes, it's possible that you're working fewer hours within certain fractional roles so that you can make a certain amount of money, which honestly, most of my income was coming from these fractional gigs. But then it allowed me to actually do all these other things that I love to do, which may have a lower income stream. So, teaching, mentoring, which often is pro bono, some speaking gigs, which pricing is all over the map, writing, and other ventures that maybe one year I get interested in a new thing. And, that's me trying to figure out what to dial up and what to dial down. So I do think this question is important, and that's where pricing is key. Because ideally, if you play your cards right, you're pricing your fractional engagement models a certain way so that you can really design your time and your life essentially to work for you. But yeah, I think there's this interesting, I don't know if it's like a myth that we need to like debunk, but like the fact that only full-time jobs can give you a certain, it can get you a certain amount of money over a period of your life, whereas actually there's different ways to meet certain financial goals, and it's not just through full-time ventures.
So let's make that practical. Let's say that someone could assume a salary of $100,000, just US dollars, just for easy math. How could someone try and shape a fractional career to, let's say, just try and match that? What might some engagements look like? What might a pipeline look like? What advice would you give someone if they're like, okay, that's the number I want to try and match? Do I need a 200 fractional roles? Do I need two fractional roles? Like, how would you advise someone trying to delve into that?
Okay, well, I guess the first thing I would say is maybe similar to how some financial accountants may advise you to diversify your portfolio, is diversify your client pipeline so that not all of your eggs are in one basket, so that you can really try different pricing models and then see what sticks. And also, again, depending on if you're more of a specialist or a generalist, kind of figuring out where you stand. I have a rate card that has a wide range, like from, and I'll talk in US rates, but, let's say 200 an hour to 400 or 500 an hour. And I have experimented with different clients everywhere within that range. And then it depends on, well, how much time, will you devote to that project? What specific need is it? And, is it a nonprofit versus a tech client? So depending on their financial backing, like you charging accordingly and being really in tune with that company's like the reality. And then really an unlock for me, and which I didn't do in my first year, but I did started doing in my second year, was tracking my time. And then basically you can figure out, are you pricing your time correctly? Although I will say the caveat to that is that the more experienced you are, it's not just about time, it's about value that you bring. So essentially you're inherently should be inflating your you're inflating the price with the value that you bring to the table. So someone who has 10 years experience may price differently than someone who has 20. And
Hmm.
also depending on not just time, but let's say the breadth of your experience within industries or different levels. And so that's called value-based pricing. And so, being really conscious of tracking your time, knowing how to price things, developing negotiation skills, and then experimenting, I guess, with different engagement models, day rates, hourly rates, retainer models, project fees. There's different pros and cons for each one, depending on what it is that you're faced with. And so then it's just, you just try things and then you talk about it with peers. I think that's an important lesson, is also just sharing your rates so that you hopefully feel like you're charging at a competitive rate, depending on your market. And then, yeah, I mean, in terms of the question around 100K, you probably can meet that between some of those fractional roles and maybe other types of projects that you may take on, or even experimenting with other activities, like I mentioned, teaching
Hmm.
or speaking gigs or other. So that was me talking about diversifying your activities. And in my case, I talk a lot about just designing your time. And but yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised. There's so many ways, I guess, to reach that number. There's not really one formula.
But a key takeaway is if you put all your revenue into one or maybe two customers, when you lose that one or two customers, it's a reset on where you're at.
Yes.
So
Which, yeah, is risky. I guess that depends on also what kind of business model you want to start building. There are plenty of people I know who end up, I don't know, one idea that came to mind was there's plenty of contractors out there who just do parental leave coverage for one company, but then, sometimes there's certain terms where after 2 years you have to take a 6-month break. And they're basically treated kind of as, they're like a embedded contractor within that company for 2 years. But then if they don't plan ahead, then they're suddenly dry and have no other work. So, I guess it's about, if you do work for yourself and you're your own boss, is being good with time management is huge. The kind of time tracking and figuring out where your time goes and energy and pricing. But then business development and like kind of planning ahead so that you can anticipate the ups and downs of what it means to run your own business. There's more active seasons, there's more dormant seasons. You kind of get used to the quieter times, and maybe that's a good time to upskill or learn something new because maybe you're not hearing from clients as much. But it can be unsettling for people who are used to, let's say more stable work environments. But then again, what is stable work environments these days? Because people are
yeah,
getting laid off and or live in a fear-based environment where they think they may get laid off. So nothing is for sure anymore, right?
yeah,
It
it
is
feels
all
like an
super.
illusion. Here's a question, right? You got into pricing and you mentioned your rates, example rates, right? But I think a key takeaway when I heard the numbers that you put is that so many people entering the fractional marketplace as providers should probably charge 2 or 3 times what they think they should charge on day one. That was a piece of advice someone gave me when I first started this. She said to me, "You really should triple your rate." And I did.
Mm,
And the first customer I pitched it to said, "That sounds reasonable." And I was so glad that I
awesome.
had that advice. So I think it's an opportunity to reinforce that point. But the other thing that I wanted to link that to is our next topic on the agenda is fractional. You mentioned that you work with a lot of women and I think you said coaching there, but is fractional creating opportunities for women in leadership roles, high earning roles that the traditional workplace just wasn't giving? Because we have a lot of women as guests on our show. It seems like in our closer circle, the fractional community tends to be more dominated by women entering this in this strategic way of building their career. Yeah, is this an opportunity for women to do things that the traditional workplace was just not giving them an opportunity for. And yeah, I'm really curious your take on this.
Yeah. Well, by the I'll answer this, and then if you want to double back on more pricing specific things, we can do that. But yeah, I mean, I write about this topic. Honestly, most of my mentorship or coaching calls are with women predominantly, and that's not by design. Like it's not like I just talk. I don't like advertise only working with women or anything like that. Tends to come up. And that's, I don't know, I guess the more research I do, I feel like a lot of women and many more underrepresented or marginalized voices are participating in the independent gig economy and often seem to be some of the main people driving it. And it's a deliberate choice now more and more to build on our own terms, especially, and you kind of touch on this, when the seat at the table wasn't designed for you. And oftentimes that's That's the key thing is a lot of people wait around hoping to maybe get a seat at that table. But in this case, yeah, there's more research. And again, just from my own experience, just seeing more women do that. And so I actually pulled some research because I'm always interested in statistics. So, specifically in design, women dominate design schools, yet only 38% become creative directors. And then in advertising and agency leadership, women hold around 25% of creative leadership roles. That means that 75% are still men. Women represent the majority of design graduates worldwide, like in schools, yet they only hold about 38% of creative director roles. I think maybe I already mentioned that, but at the highest levels, essentially it gets worse. So there's only, let's say, 29% of executive creative directors that are women. Looking back at, like, if we talk about just progress, in 2008 there was 3% of female creative directors, and now we're at whatever I said, either 38 or 29%. Um, and so progress remains painfully slow. And that's in a very specific slice of the world. And I do think the AI dimension and tech is actually an even more urgent angle because I feel like AI is reshaping roles and the value creation in tech specifically. And so it's actually widening the gender gap at the leadership level, which is a risk in a lot of ways. And a lot of organizations aren't countering that by helping, mid-career women in product or design like move into these senior AI roles. So this is happening as we speak, and I feel like it makes the fractional argument even more timely because if the full-time pipeline is essentially failing women, the fractional model can become a more credible alternative route to the influence that maybe they desire. Um, and I mean, there's a whole list of things that I feel like companies aren't doing well that specifically could support primarily more women. Like they don't offer great caregiving services. They've been rolling back on remote work all over the world. They're scaling back career development programs. There's less manager advocacy. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of men who are exploring this path as well, but I am seeing more women leave the workforce because these spaces are and continue to be not designed for them and seem to be almost going backwards, unfortunately. So yeah, the fractional model can be very desirable, and I feel like what's important with this podcast, but like other publications that are starting to talk about or scratch the surface on what a fractional path can lead to is giving people more options so that they know that they could maybe build their own careers and have the impact that they want to have. But yeah, depending on where in the world, even the term itself is still misunderstood and has different definitions.
So I want to kind of follow up on that. I have a friend of mine. She is in her mid 30s. She was a very good specialist in a very targeted field. She pulled out of her career to raise her children. They're now getting older, and she's now looking to get back into her career. So I've been trying to like give her some feedback and support on the side. How would you talk to someone like that where maybe she lacks the confidence, even though her ability is higher than many men that I've worked alongside and seen? I know she could do their roles as well as, if not way better, but she doesn't see the confidence. And so she has been unsure how to get back into her career space in a fractional capacity. What general advice might you give her or someone in this position to step back out and to try it? I'll give you an example. I've seen roles that I've shared with her that she is a 80% match for. And I know she could do 100% of the job in a matter of days, if not weeks, but she's been hesitant to apply to them. And these are fractional roles. Yeah. What advice do you have for her or that I could share with her to try and help her as she wants to have a more free type of career path and not be locked down because she does want to also be around her kids. So yeah, I'm curious how you think about that.
So, I mean, unfortunately, the sensation, what you're sharing about your friend feels like a very common narrative that I hear a lot. Whether that's women who've recently become mothers who are trying to re-enter the workforce, um, or again, just women in general. I think I don't have these stats with me, but I think off the top, I mean, from when I was doing some more research for some of my classes recently, I think statistically women don't apply to roles if they don't feel like they can hit almost like 100% of the lists that the job description lists out. Whereas I think for men, if they feel like they can do like 70% of the job, they still apply, which is like,
Research
you
bears
know,
that out. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, generally, whether you're reentering the workforce after becoming a mom or just a woman who, like, just from a gender perspective, there's these like crazy statistics, and I think that comes with just how the system is built. And so, my rule of thumb is that I encourage anyone that I meet that if they feel like they can do, and you brought this up, like 80% of the JD, that they should definitely apply because you really never know. So usually I definitely, it's not 100%. First of all, that's almost impossible to meet 100% of a job's requirements. And because honestly, most of these job descriptions that are written are written for the like ideal unicorn that may or may not exist. So as
And
long as you feel,
the
oh, go
one
ahead.
time I've seen that, it was paying
Yeah.
so little money, I laughed at it. I was like, "Okay, I actually meet this. I'm not gonna do it." Sorry,
Yeah,
continue.
well, no, I mean, so there's the just encouraging your friend, but also just whoever's listening that honestly, if you feel like you can meet at least 80% of the job and believe that you can, learn on the job and just are curious, and also obviously comes with kind of proving that during the interview process is like really just showing that you're eager to learn and like willing to kind of jump in quickly. My biggest thing is definitely apply. Now, for people who are now between your friend's experience or just people in general who are questioning a more flexible path, like what fractional can offer, or who may be looking for, whether that's part time work or contract work or consulting work. I mean, the best part about the workforce that we live in today is that there's actually so many different options that one could explore that's not the full-time path. And so, I don't know, to me that's exciting because it means that you could try different things and see if you like it or see if it takes off, and if that doesn't work, try something else. And even in my position, I've tried pitching clients with other independent friends and worked with a client, like basically I had like a small collective of other creatives and we had complementary skills, and we won that piece of business and then we're able to do that work. I've done other work where I'm 3 months in a company devoting most of my hours in the week doing like a coverage for a project, and then I've tried all kinds of things, and that's what's exciting for me. But it gives me that ability to experiment with different engagement models and then figure out what I like and what I don't like, which I know is a privilege to just say that I get to try these different things and then maybe manifest certain kinds of roles to come. But I have met people that are similar to your friend, and I usually encourage them to parallel path. So essentially, if they're trying to, I don't know, I guess redefine what their career could look like over the next X number of years, maybe it's worth, applying to some full-time jobs while updating your, I mean, I don't know what field your friend is in, but while updating your website and resume, maybe also trying to find some clients to try out certain types of fractional relationships. And that way you're at least increasing the probability of getting a certain kind of job and then trying different things. And so, sometimes I meet people at that crossroad where they're not sure, maybe the stability of a full-time job could be really good for them, but they want some kind of flexibility. And so how could they also maybe try to stay independent and only pursue those types of paths? And so, yeah, I guess I would encourage them to try to do a few different things. That being said, that's a lot of energy and time,
Yeah.
so that's usually the harder part is finding a job as a full-time job. We all know this. So, I guess giving yourself some grace and maybe trying things, maybe it's exploring one path, taking a break, maybe exploring another path, taking a break. Maybe it's hard to do all of it at once, and I respect that. But yeah, unfortunately there's just all these inherent things that are, I hate to say this, but just statistically proven around just many women who either suffer from imposter syndrome and lack that confidence, or truly like won't even try, applying to a job if they don't meet 100% of the requirements. It's just very common, and I guess I would just encourage other women to not be so hard on themselves and remember that that job, you're just as deserving to that job as anybody else. And the worst that could happen is you don't hear back, I mean, I'm not saying like apply to every job. If you're like completely underqualified and you apply to like 7 different jobs at the same company and look completely scattered, like that won't help you either. There's definitely a strategy to that, but I guess having some level of self-awareness, developing that self-confidence, and then kind of putting yourself out there and then getting the support, it could be helpful for maybe your friend to find other people who are in a similar situation than she is. And that is can be very encouraging, just like finding that community to build you up.
So that's actually a really great place to end this because as you're talking about this, I'm like, oh my word, I'm going to share this podcast with her, of course, so she can listen to it. But if she or someone else listening has been hearing what you're saying, they're resonating with it, what is a way that they could reach out? You mentioned that you offer mentoring, you teach. We'll put it all into the show notes, but can you let people know where they can find out more about you if they're wanting to reach out to you for some mentoring or potentially for a role to hire you?
Sure. Well, so as I said, I'm currently based in Paris. So just reminding people where I am currently, but I just came
Yeah.
from San Francisco, and I'm trying to work with companies kind of all over the world. Do have a website, which is my name, rachelgogel.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sometimes on Instagram and Threads, although I feel like less and less. On my website, I have a page devoted to all of the activities that I mentioned earlier. So there's a page for teaching, a page for mentorship, a page for other things, and on the mentoring website specifically because you called this out, there's different directories that I'm a mentor on. And so you can either sign up through any of those. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, depending on what you want to talk about. If the relationship becomes more ongoing and it turns into
Mhm.
more of a coaching rapport, I have different kind of custom paid packages, but I try to make it as accessible as possible to people. And then I actually have a page on my website called Press, and it just lists out a bunch of different articles or podcasts that I've either written or been part of or been interviewed for. And a lot of them touch on these topics, especially the ones, that are maybe more recent in the last 5+ years. Really touch on this a lot just because I'm in it and I think about it a lot. And a lot of the questions that I get tend to be related to this. So feel free to also peruse those and you could maybe learn more about. I know we didn't have as much time to dig into pricing or even how AI has affected my way of working, but I know we just scratched the surface, you guys.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. I definitely want to have you back on because I have so many more questions, even about moving to Paris and what that's been like. Thank you for joining us. I'll put those into the show notes. And then for
Thanks.
anyone listening, if you have follow up for us, email at fractional.fm. If you have questions about the show, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you.